Hello everybody, this is Andrei and you are on the Marketing Innovation Show. On today's episode, we have Bruce Eckfeldt from the US, who is the CEO of the US-based firm Eckfeldt and Associates. He's a scale-up business coach and an Inkcom author and CEO. Hi Bruce, how's life? How's everything going?
Hi, Andrei. Just fine. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Really looking forward to our episode together. This is going to be a very insightful and interesting talk. So guys tuning in, today we will discuss marketing in the context of scaling up businesses, and we will focus more on the service businesses as well, because this is where Bruce has a wealth of knowledge. He also runs a podcast on this niche, which we will link in the description.
Awesome.
And yes, very exciting times. So Bruce, tuning in from the US, early morning for you, right?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty reasonable. I've done earlier, but I know it's always difficult coordinating international calls and meetings.
Well, this is the world we live in, so
exactly.
Yeah, we are adapting to it. So let's see. Let's get the ball rolling. Tell us a bit more about you, about where you started, how you developed your career, and some of the interesting projects that you maybe are working on at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So while I started life as an architect professionally, I started life as an architect, did a couple of degrees at McGill University in Montreal, ended up getting recruited into the technology space after a couple of years in the world. I was doing a lot of computer modeling and animation, and it was just a kind of a natural transition for me to focus on kind of digital technology and product development. And so I got very involved in product strategy, digital strategy, spent many years with, I did stuff for the Met Museum of Modern Art here in New York, WebMD, a lot of the big kind of .coms, as well as the company like Motorola, helping them kind of figure out how to leverage digital technologies in their business early in the kind of internet days, and then started a tech company back in 2002, lean agile software development. So I got more kind of steeped in the actual code software process of things. Sold that a couple of years ago and have transitioned into basically a strategic coach. So I work with CEOs and their leadership teams on growth strategy, and I work on a range of industries, but services is a big one for me. And as you mentioned, I run a podcast called Scaling Up Services, and it's all about how do we grow service-based businesses, because there's some unique challenges. It's a different business model. There's some, I'd like to say they're easy to start and they're hard to scale. So that's kind of what we tackle on the podcast. And marketing obviously is a big part of that. Really understanding how do you go to market with these things, and that's the only way you're really going to grow the company.
Super. Very much looking forward to our chat here, because us as well as our service-based business. So if we can find some secrets from here, that'd be awesome. Okay, super. So just to give you a feel of our listeners here. So many people are from the marketing and sales space, marketing and sales leaders, but we have a bunch of entrepreneurs here as well, either already running their businesses or looking at starting and scaling up their businesses. So I think obviously we are more a marketing focused podcast, but we tackle a lot of other business aspects that go with it as well. Tell us a bit about how you see marketing fitting in when looking at a business and looking at exploring ways to scale it up.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of discuss or describe marketing as being that function, those activities that you do that is going to generate qualified sales leads, right? The things that are going to create these kind of inbound interests at various levels of kind of readiness to buy, but it's about creating that demand, creating those inbound leads that I can then put into a sales process, which is really about moving them through a decision-making process, a proposal, a scoping, getting them down to some kind of signed contract or signed engagement. Honestly, I think most companies really don't do marketing certainly in sales and service companies, and so really looking at marketing. I mean, they'll do all sorts of activities that sort of generate leads, but in terms of really marketing, I don't think most companies approach it. Certainly not strategically. For me, the first thing is marketing is based on some kind of target customer, right? Like you have to have a strategic definition of who your core customer, your ideal customer, your target customer is, because that is if you're not focusing on some way, shape, or form, it's just not going to be effective, right? You can't market to everybody. Like you need to decide who you're going to market to. It also is it doesn't really become a measurable tool, right? Because it's basically then you're just talking about awareness building, and it's that can happen all sorts of ways, or thought leadership. Like I can go present at conferences and things like that. that would be generating potentially some sales leads, but unless you're really tied into some kind of strategic definition of core customer, I would say that's really not marketing per se. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the first thing, is like, you have to have a core customer, you have to have some kind of definition of your target, and then you've got to have some kind of strategy, some kind of how are we different in the world relative to the companies that do the things we do, because you need to position yourself in your marketing. Marketing is not just, hey, rah, rah, we're great. Mm-hmm. Marketing is, hey, this is how we're different than anyone else, and if you are like this, then we should be a clear and obvious choice for you. That's real good strategic marketing from my point of view. That fits into the broader kind of corporate strategy and ultimately the kind of the broader scaling strategy of our company.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, if let's say somebody wants to look at their marketing budgets and maybe scale them or review the channels that they are using, probably the best place for them to start would be to go back to who they thought their customers were in the beginning, see if that still matches what they think would be a good customer today, and then looking at how to get in front of them most effectively, and then to position themselves as, in line with the type of customers they want, right?
Yeah, I mean, generally with my clients, we'll do an annual strategic review process, which is pretty in depth, and it does re-question. It kind of goes back and validates, our target customer, and it may have shifted, right? So the market can shift, competitors could shift, the world can change. It's changing a lot right now, and therefore my definition of my target customer can change. One of the best ways I find to identify a target customer or pieces of input into your target customer definition is look at your last 3 years of customers and rank order them on a 3-part score. Who is a pleasure to serve, who is profitable, and who promotes you to other businesses, mm-hmm. right? If you can score your current customer list on those 3 criteria, equal weighting, and then look at the top 5%, that is a great way to begin to identify who your core customer is. Basically, who do you serve well and who do you profit from is going to really be insightful. And then what I want to do is figure out, I want to use those. I want to look at those people, and I want to look at how are they different from everyone else, and use that to define my core customer so that I can figure out my marketing strategy.
Got you. And then when you say that many companies they don't really do marketing in the way that they should, is that maybe they don't go so much in depth anymore after the first stage of planning marketing when they are planning activities, and they just basically go in blind a bit without knowing exactly what these 5% of the companies or the people would be looking for?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, if I were to be able to give it my stamp of approval that someone is approaching marketing strategically. One is they have a definition of their core customer that really is a decisive set of criteria that make them different from every other customer. Like, people will say, oh, well, my target customer pays on time. Okay, well, I mean, a lot of customers pay on time, right? So unless you're telling me that all your bad customers or you're not other customers in the world don't pay on time and someone else might want those, it's got to be something that I'm going to differentiate on. That is going to be different from everyone else, but someone else could choose the other side and it still works, right? They're decisive. While we appreciate all these kind of attributes, these are the ones that are really going to define for us. So I think that's one. 2 is they have to have some kind of positioning. They have to say, look, we are different from all the competitors in this space in this way. If they can't answer that very well, and if it's different than price, like, we can all say, oh, well, I can charge less. Nah, that's a race to a bottom, right? Like, we don't want to be in a price war. We want to be in a position where we can charge premium prices. The only way we're going to do that is have it be clearly differentiated in a couple of meaningful ways for our target customer. The lastly is I talk about channel strategy. So all marketing has to be done through some kind of channel. All lead generation happens through some kind of channel. And I have to make, unless you're $100 million or maybe $50 million and bigger, you're better off really double downing on 1 or 2 key channels than trying to, go to the trade shows, do SEO, do email campaigns, try guerrilla tactics, do affiliate marketing. Like, if you're doing more than 1 or 2 of those things and you're not $50 million, you're probably doing all of them poorly, right? I'd rather see you do 1 or 2 really, really well than you trying to all these, I mean, if you're in experimentation mode, you may need to gather some data, in which case, great, like do a bunch of experiments. But for the purposes of choosing one or two that you're really going to leverage and you're really going to double down on, not that you're going to continue to do all those different channel strategies.
Got you. I remember from our previous conversation that you mentioned one way that your clients see you is that you are the guy that gets them from a couple million per year to a couple hundred million per year.
Yep.
So that's very impressive. And I was curious to find mainly in the service business, since we, as mentioned, we are in the service business, and we also see that, compared to a tech business where you can just get a business more profitable if you run it well with the revenue, you tend to get to a level in services where the profit margin is not necessarily growing with the growth in revenue. So how do you tackle that, or what are some strategies that maybe our listeners could use or could think of in order to ensure that when they grow their revenue, they are also looking at growing their profit margin or the profitability?
Yeah. So two things I would say we focus on when we're scaling service-based companies. One is you got to choose, right? You got to really zero in on what is the core service that you offer and really focus on that. I think most of the times what I'm running into is there's too much of a wide range of service offerings, and they're trying to provide a really broad set of offerings, and it just dilutes everything. And if you really want to scale the business, you've got to narrow this down into what is the core service that you offer, and how can you really standardize that and operationalize that so that I can do that again and again and again with confidence, with precision, with discipline, and with profitability, right? And that is one of the ways you're going to really grow your profitability, is by doing the same thing again and again, because you're going to operationalize it. You're going to optimize how you do it. You're going to make sure that those people, you're going to get the most out of your people, meaning that if I have a wide range of services, I need very diverse talent, and that diverse talent is going to be expensive. But the problem is I'm not always leveraging all that diversity all the time, so my profitability is going to be quite low. Versus if I have a very standard service that is repeatable, I can basically not have to hire quite as senior and quite as diverse, quite as generalist, multifaceted folks. I can hire really targeted folks, and I can really leverage the value that I'm paying for them, right? So that is one way that I'm really going to scale the business, and I'm going to scale profitability. The other thing is really kind of digging into that core customer. Is like the more that we are really focused on serving a particular type of person, the more value we're going to create, which means the more profit we're going to have, and the easier it is to service them. So again, we're going to get back to really making sure that the service is delivered consistently and easily. Right. So I just say, the faster you want to scale, the more you need to focus. Right. It really comes down to that strategy.
To basically dominating the niche rather than being a fish in a big pond.
I mean, I will say maybe there's another little dirty secret about scaling service companies, is that in fact, you kind of want to think like a product company, right? Like you want to think about how do you turn your service into a product at some level, meaning that it's very defined. It's very, this is the input, this is the output, these are the stages to it. In some cases, you're actually building product components. So if you have, things that normally you would do through service, and you can figure out how to create programs, systems, things that will automatically generate some of that stuff for you, particularly at the low level. It's going to make it easier. You're going to operationalize. You're going to systematize the work that you do. So, I mean, it's kind of think like a product company.
Very good insight. And actually, we can see maybe, I think this is applicable in the service business, where they are digitalizing a bit more in order to create workflows and, I guess, processes, as you mentioned, because when you have the process, then you can multiply that, and you can make sure that the quality is still there at the same level, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at like law, accounting, like all of those industries over the last 10, 15 years, it's all been about how do I create systems? In some cases, it's how do I systematize this so that I can find, resources from other parts of the world that I'm paying a fraction of the cost for that can still do the work, right? But I've got the infrastructure, the guidelines, the SOPs, and everything to still deliver this on a consistent, dependable quality level. In some cases, it's actually software. I mean, in some cases, they've actually created software that will do the analysis, the checking, do the research, do the aggregation of stuff, and actually create 90% of what you need. 90% of the document will actually be created by a software system that then an expert can go in and just do the last 10%. I mean, these industries are being these service industries are being productized as things go on, and it's really that cream, that top 5%, 10% of the work that needs to get done by an expert human. That's where the service component is now, but it's backed by systems and procedures and SOPs and technology.
Mm-hmm. Super. And I'm not sure whether this is classified or not, but would be really nice if we could explore some of the success stories that you saw or that you were part of, because I'm sure that you get a lot of insight into the businesses that you work with. And even if we don't give names, I think it would be interesting if we could take an industry or one of your clients in a specific niche, and then we could explore the ways that maybe they have looked at marketing or used marketing, specifically digital, if you have that sort of insight and you can share it, in order to amplify their growth or set the right KPIs that they can then optimize.
Yeah. I think that, there's a bunch of examples we could talk about, but in terms of the marketing side, I think the most interesting ones that I've worked with, so this was basically marketing services around a very specific industry, where they realized that the lead qualification process was taking a lot of time and energy, and so they basically, what would happen is they would start talking to a company, they'd have a series of meetings, they'd craft a proposal, and then they would get to these final stages, and then it would kept falling down. Like their conversion rate at the end, conversion rate was very good in the beginning, and then it would fall off. And by flipping around and looking at what were the reasons that they were falling off that very tail, and how could we move those decisions to the very front, became the way to kind of invert that funnel. So most sales processes, everything goes along and a lot of things falls out at the end. We actually want a lot of things to fall out at the beginning so that we can focus on those things that can continue. So in this case was a whole, kind of a web survey qualification process that was highly automated. So rather than having an in-person meeting very quickly up front, they forced the client through this process in the very beginning, which had a very high correlation to future success. So while it dropped a lot of folks in the beginning, filling out some web forms, having to answer some questions, pulling together some research, a lot of people fell off, but the right people fell off. And the people that made it through were both a good quality lead, but they also proved that they really wanted to do this, and they were highly they were really committed to doing the work. All right, so by using these kind of tools and technologies to make prospects do work beforehand, really helped increase the productivity of the funnel. Another one that I saw really well was it was a big technology company we were working with. So they provide basically software kind of, development services, consulting services around software, and their projects are. Average project size is probably $225,000, right? Like these are not small deals. And the problem was that these deals were taking a long time. They would win on one out of every three, but it was just, it was a hard slog. And so what we did is we went through their best customers. We identified one of the key pain points that they had was scoping these projects in the very beginning and do kind of risk analysis. So came up with an early stage offering. It was like a 2-day, 3-day workshop that they could put the client through, which gave them a very valuable risk plan associated with the project they were trying to undertake. Fixed price it, right? Because they knew they could kind of get through the workshop in 2 or 3 days. They knew how much it was. They made money on it. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was really a marketing effort, not a project. And it did a couple of things. One, it really verified that these folks are really willing to spend money on this, because half the time they got to the final number and it was just too much, and so they wouldn't do it. So if they're not willing to spend at least $10,000, $20,000 on this upfront, early stage assessment, they're probably not going to be wanting to invest that kind of money later in the process. It also gave them, it basically developed a relationship, right? So it gave them a chance to work together and really see how this company operated, what their style was, and if it was a good fit. And honestly, it was a fit both ways. The company could see whether or not it was going to work out. Like, is this a good cultural fit? And so by putting this early in the process and making that part of the marketing effort, it was like, how do we take these inbound leads, all these kind of potential things we have, and actually service that and promote that? It gave them a great funnel of then highly qualified leads that made it farther down the pipe. The other ones that the content marketing has been big. I think the last 5-10 years, some of the better content marketing stuff I've seen is, things like podcasting, things like webinars, things like the being the panel, pulling together the panel discussions and being kind of the thought leader, positioning themselves as thought leader, have been great tools for a lot of the companies I've worked with, particularly around kind of the higher end professional services, so that they are seen as kind of this halo effect of industry leader. I think those have been really effective. I'm a big fan of Gabriel Weinberg's traction, not the EOS traction, but Gabriel Weinberg's traction, and looking at the 19 different channels by which companies generally generate leads. So I would call that marketing. I think marketing strategies you can use, and it's everything from content marketing to SEO to SEM to guerrilla marketing, affiliates, business development. So that I will run clients through that 19 channel strategy worksheet and really just investigate all the things they're doing or not doing and where we want to spend time. So that's another great resource I find for folks.
Mm-hmm. Super. Thanks a lot. So basically here I have a question, which I think might be in the minds of some of our listeners as well. I very much agree to the fact that you need to filter the leads well so that you can invest time and effort and money further in the deal process. But what do you do if the offering on the market is pretty big and then it's somebody that wants to purchase, let's say, a service or is looking for a service provider, but then seeing that they have to put more energy in the case of filling up a questionnaire and going through the, like this sort of filtering out process, they might be put off and just go with the easier option, or asking them in the case of the company that was charging potential clients for this upfront small projects, being asked to pay money to qualify themselves versus just going with a easier option, which would be maybe like a competitor. Have you seen a big impact on this? Like through these cases that you mentioned of people like maybe potential qualified leads dropping off? Or is
well, so I think that the last thing you said there is the key, which is qualified leads dropping off. So I think all good marketing should attract highly desirable, basically prospects, and it should actually repel everyone else. Meaning they should be discriminatory. They should, if I'm dropping leads, or if I'm not getting certain people to sign up to engage in the process, to go through the sales process, and those are not people that I want, that's good, right? Because part of what I want to do is actually remove those people that are going to take away focus. All right. So if all the tools, all the techniques you're using, I evaluate each one of them on how well does it attract the people we want to work with and repel the people that we don't. Right. It's easy. I shouldn't say that. Often the problem is a marketing effort attracts everyone. And now I've got to do the filtering in the sales process. And generally it gets expensive, right? Like I move someone to a sales process and I'm talking about calls, I'm talking about meetings, I'm talking about proposals, like all those things are very costly steps. So part of a really good marketing strategy is that it actually repels those people that I know are not going to be a good fit, right? Either because they're not profitable, they're not a pleasure to work with, they're not going to be a good promoter for us long-term, right? So I want to look at each one of those cases. Now, if I have some activity, some part of my marketing process that is repelling people that otherwise would be highly qualified leads, then I got to change it. Like that is not an effective marketing step, marketing strategy, because that is we want to repel the people we don't want and attract the people we want.
Super. Yeah, got you. I think that this sometimes might require a bit of courage to be, to be willing to drop off some of your, potential leads. But I think that in the long run, if you are looking at, maybe scaling marketing budgets to raise the number of inbound leads that you get through marketing activities, putting up a filter might increase your cost per lead. But as you mentioned, might decrease the other costs that come in the deal making process.
Well, and so oftentimes, I might even say all the time, but just because I can't think of all the times I work, 99% of the time, yes, your cost per qualified lead is going to go up, but your cost of sales will go down and your long-term customer value will increase and your profitability will increase. Right. So it's a trade-off. I say, anyone who comes to me that wants to scale their business, whether it's service or otherwise, unless you're willing to make some hard decisions, whether it's about your customers, about your marketing strategy, about your employees, about which services you're offering, about, everything about scaling a business is making tough choices. But the better you make the tough choices and the better you focus, the more successful you're going to be at scaling the business quickly.
Super. Sounds good. Thank you.
Easy. It's that easy. Just do that and it's all fine. You'll make tons of money. Don't worry.
Okay, so now looking at, because we talked about these cases, and now looking at the specific channels and maybe some of the things that have changed over the last, let's say, 4 months or even in 2020. What have you seen as a general feel within the companies that you are working in? Were they moving more marketing budgets onto sales? Were they changing their approach to marketing into a more thought leadership / content marketing approach? Have you seen any of these things happening, at least, in the UK, in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. I think any company who hasn't made some kind of adjustment to their business the last 4 months or 5 months, something's wrong. The world has changed, right? So you're gonna have to make some adjustment. The question is if you're making little tweaks, if you're really pivoting, or whether you're completely rethinking your business model. That's really the question and kind of the challenges that most of the companies have faced. And generally, when I'm working with folks the last, through this last 4 or 5 months, has been the first question is what's changed with your customers, right? This understanding how has the world changed for your customers, and what are they worried about? What are they focused on? What do they need right now? Because the fact is the thing that you provided before may have been super valuable in the end of 19, but in this world of July of 2020, that could be really different now. And so, you have to assess what are your customer needs, and then it's like, okay, well, is what we do still valuable to them? And if not, do we need to tweak, right? Do we need to change this somehow because of how the business has changed for our customers? Do we need to pivot, meaning we need to maybe we need to think about a different core customer. Maybe we need to think about a different core service that we're offering them. Like we really need to shift. And I have a whole thing on you can shift products, or you can shift what you do and you can shift who you do it for, but you can't shift them both at the same time, right? So there's a whole pivoting kind of philosophy strategy that I have around this, but you need to look at both of those dimensions and decide where the opportunities are, or do you need to just completely rethink your business model? Like if what you do right now is no longer relevant or is not going to be relevant for a significant period of time, like, do I need to do something else? Do I need to recreate the business model? A lot of this has to do with the strategic assessment. We call it, envisioning the future. What do the next 12, 24, 36 months look like? And in some cases, it's, hey, you know what? In 36 months, my business is fine, right? What I do is back in demand, where it should be fine, assuming that we've got vaccines, all that kind of stuff. Like this whole situation we're in is more or less resolved, and my business is still there. Then it's a question of how do I survive, right? How do I get from now to 36 months? If at 36 months you realize, you know what, the world's just changed, right? What I do is no longer going to be really in need, or not the way it is. What I do now is not going to be the most valuable thing in the world, and I need to change. Then I need to figure out what that new vision is going to be, and then how do I, survive? But how do I survive in a way that's going to evolve me to where I need to be? I always use I grew up in Minnesota. I went to school in Canada, so I'm a big hockey guy. So Wayne Gretzky, one of the great hockey players, always said one of the things that makes him such a great hockey player is always skated to where the puck was going to be. Right? He was never chasing the puck. He was figuring out strategically, okay, I see, based on what's happening here, the puck is going to be here, and I need to get there, and I'm in the right spot when the puck gets there. That's what you need to do with the business. And in order to do that, you need to make some guesses about where the world's going to go.
And I think, I mean, equally, this can apply to the marketing strategy. Like, what are people most likely to be interested in 2 months down the line? And then
if your business, if your marketing was run through trade shows, like you need to figure something else out for the next 36 months, because that world of trade shows is not going to happen in the same way. In fact, I would say it's forever change. Right, the things that are going to happen in the next 36 months for trade shows are going to permanently change the whole concept of how people do trade shows. And if you're in the trade show business, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, actually, we saw a lot of movement there with the trade shows and event organizers. Many of them have started to integrate more technology. I found out about recently, it's a product that was not yet launched, but there was a company in the UK producing a platform that was allowing you to run networking events and conferences. And every person that was in the public and was paying a ticket online, they could just speak with the people next to them, so that they couldn't chat, like sitting in a virtual room. And then they were moving around, but then obviously employing technology and algorithms here so that they can replicate to a certain extent.
I've seen a couple of companies do this, and I think this first reaction is simulate. Like, can we simulate a physical trade show experience online? And I get it. But ultimately, I think the winners in this space are going to be people that fundamentally rethink, well, what is the point of a trade show? How can we leverage technology and the virtualization of this stuff to create a fundamentally new model for how we kind of run a quote-unquote trade show using these things? I think those are going to be the big winners. And I think because you're going to have some of this stuff in the future, there's going to be much more of these kind of blended physical, virtual kind of events where, whether it's at the show, I've got, virtual participants as well. And that's, an integrated process, or before and after, the lead up and the post, there's going to be a lot more kind of connection and integration and, community around those things. That's why I say, I think that the trade show world is forever changed. We'll have some kind of trade shows, but they're not going to look like they looked the end of 2019.
Agree. Okay, and moving into, we are already in talking about today, but even more, what's a project that you are working on at the moment that gets you really excited about the way that they are presenting themselves to the world, and why? Why do you see that working in the way that they communicate their value proposition, or the way that they acquire new clients in a world where it might be harder than it used to be to get people to spend money on services?
Yeah. So probably the most interesting areas that I'm working in right now. So I run a second podcast called Thinking Outside the Bud. It's all about cannabis. I do a lot of work with cannabis companies in the cannabis industries. And the U.S., they've been declared essential services. So they have actually continued to go. Some of the most interesting things that's happening in that industry is the introduction of sort of delivery, and this everything to date has been through a dispensary, through a retail location. And because of COVID and restrictions and not being able to have people come to physical spaces, they've had to find other ways around this process. And people are doing some really interesting kind of business model shifts. And that's causing some really interesting, I'll call it customer acquisition processes, because it's a growing industry, because it's not very physical based anymore. People are finding some interesting ways to do everything from referral programs to, promotional efforts through online apps. The challenge in the States here is that because it is still federally legal, and don't ask me to explain the whole thing, it's going to take an hour to go through the details of cannabis, but it's federally legal, which means while you can do business in a state and still be protected, if you do certain things, you run across federal lines and it becomes an issue. So there's some restrictions there. And because of that, things like Google and Facebook do not let you promote cannabis products and services on their platforms. So there's been some really crafty things that people have been doing, and being able to still market these products, whether it's through other networks, whether they use some things like events and stuff like that to kind of sneak by a little bit of the people that would block these things on some of these platforms. But I would say it's probably some of the more innovative. It's scrappy, right? Because they're having to kind of be creative around it. But figuring out shadow page or shadow websites and things like that to kind of be able to get traffic going and then convert it over. And it's interesting what they're doing to kind of get around the restrictions, both federal legal restrictions, as well as the platforms have said, hey, look, we're just not going to deal in this business right now. But they're figuring out ways of doing it. I would say that's probably where the really innovative stuff is happening.
Interesting. And I think this is also a very nice exercise because, we have Facebook and Google dominating the whole space. So basically that's digital 80%. And then it's about figuring out the other, let's say 20% of what you can do online that can generate a very good return on your marketing investment and so on.
Yeah.
So specifically, did you find any other channels that were nice or interesting for promoting products or services in this project alone or a parallel one?
Yeah, so I think, in general, the ones that I see working fairly well right now are very content-based. People that are using good quality content as sort of top of funnel, engagement for folks. I think the really good companies that I see right now that are doing this well are really kind of separating out this kind of audience attraction and engagement versus sales. Like they're setting up really good ways of bringing someone into their fold, feeding them a regular dose of good quality content with little hooks that are triggers for when they're really to buy. Because the problem with most of these companies, particularly depending on the market and how frequent purchase is, a lot of the problems is like the actual time of purchase, the actual interest in purchase can be very short and not very frequent, right? So, if you're buying a new car, like I'm not running around every day thinking about buying a new car, but when I think about buying a new car, I'm going to buy it within 30 to 60 days, right? It's like either my car broke down or I'm like, finally, fuck it, I'm just going to get a new car. And so you need to have this kind of casual relationship going with these little hooks so that when I move into that buy mode, I can quickly move you into a sales process. And I think people either make the mistake of just kind of sending out content with no hook, or sending out just sending out hooks, right? And it's like, I'm not ready to buy, so don't talk to me about buying. So I think the really good companies are finding creative ways of doing that. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of stuff with. Probably everyone is kind of zoomed out, but I think the webinar stuff had worked pretty well the last couple months. I think there's still opportunities. I think the content series, anything that will help create content and connection between folks. Personally, I'm finding actually a lot of CEO roundtables are working really well because people want to, they want to talk to, they want strategy, they want to pivot, but they also want to work with some other CEOs. They don't want to, they want to see what's going on. They want to really get triangulation of the market. So I think that kind of stuff is working really well right now.
Super. So when you mean hooks, you mean sales hooks, like a call to action, right?
Yeah. So it's the offer to engage in a conversation, right? So whereas content marketing, I'm just giving you good content. The hook is, and if you have a question on this, or if you want to explore this, or if you want to do this assessment, or if you want more details, pull in it. And that hook should be a qualifier for, hey, this people are now moving into a buying mode.
Gotcha. Okay, so one thing that I think would be nice for us to do, because we ran through a lot of things and I think there's a lot of value that can be extracted from here, but just to make it easy for the guys that tuned in so far and are probably trying to, create action points for them to implement into the business. I think what we can do now is to try to find 3 or 4 main points that they can take away, and depending on the stage of their business or their objectives in terms of marketing or scale up, they can go and implement these into their businesses, maybe even this week, or at least make the first. What do you think are?
So I would say 3. Yeah. So I think three things. If anyone's listening here looking to kind of apply some of these ideas, one is this core customer. Really look at all your core customers, literally rank them on a scale of 1 to 10 on easy to serve, or who's a pleasure to serve, who's profitable, and who promotes you to other folks. That will give you that first pass of, I should find more people like this, right? That's going to be your first pass of core customer. Honestly, just doing that, I would probably look at the bottom 5%. And I would, with 95% certainty, said if you just fire those 5%, you're in better shape. Because usually the bottom 5% of your customer list is actually costing you money. Because they're not that profitable and they're taking up a lot of your time and they're not referring you to other folks. If you just ditch them, focused on the remaining 95%, typically you might even go as high as 10 or even 20% of that list. That would be one thing. So just look at your customers and rank order them. 2, really decide what service you're going to focus on. Really go through the services that you're offering, pick one that you can really double down on, start to systematize. That is going to help you tremendously. and then I would look at that kind of the marketing channel stuff. And if you need to do some experiments, but I would, pick one that you can really get good at, right? It's trying to do more than one is gonna dilute your efforts too much. So look at those 19 different channels. Pick one that you have the resources, you're comfortable in, that your customers are going to be in a buying conversation, and that's probably if you just do those three things, that's huge. And they're not that hard. I mean, they're not easy, but they're not that hard.
Can I pick your brains on something now? Because I'm curious to find your point on this. So you mentioned to have only one or two channels and just double down on those ones. But what do you do in the case of somebody that is maybe in the exploration mode and they are looking at opportunities or options for purchase, but they haven't made a decision yet, or they are not necessarily yet ready to buy? Because us marketeers, when we look at that case, we employ a multi-channel marketing strategy, which means that we try to capture people, through content marketing maybe, and then we deliver content to them, maybe do remarketing on different channels like Facebook or Google, depending on, what we sell. Would you think that the value that you get from creating these multiple touch points and instead of compressing them into one or two channels would be more valuable? Why? I mean, do you think that doing something good on one or two channels can raise the effectiveness of your activities, or how do you think about it?
I think it's where you are. I mean, I would say the multi-channel marketing strategies are great for people who have developed good digital channel marketing strategies and are looking to optimize, right? They've been able to take it so far through a single channel, and a multi-channel strategy will potentially enhance that greatly, but they've got to have figured out that multi-channel. That the case that I run into a lot is, I'm doing these webinars and I'm doing SEO and I do networking and I'm going to the trade show, and like they're doing 5, 6, 7 of these just fundamental different channels, and that's where they're going to dilute their efforts. And unless you've got major resources. In fact, even if you have major resources, if you have a channel that's producing at 60%, why would you bother investing in a channel that's maybe it's producing at 40%? That's not bad, but you got a channel that's producing at 60%. Why not just do more of that? I mean, if you could tell me that I reach capacity, I can't get anything more of that channel, okay, fine, we can have that conversation. But that's rare. Usually, they don't have a strategy, right? They're just trying a whole bunch of stuff. And once you double down on it. So I think the multi-channel digital strategy is certainly a way to optimize some of that stuff. I mean, you may have a case where a particular type of customer is impenetrable without a multi-channel strategy. That might be the case. But I think we're dealing with either optimizing processes and I think you need to kind of get to a base level with someone before you can really optimize, or you're dealing with somewhat of exception. And every once in a while there's a interesting strategic situation where you have to apply a multi-channel strategy to get any leads really effectively coming through. But usually I find that most companies are struggling just to get the core channel running before they consider multi-channel optimization.
Gotcha. So basically, just if you run multi-channel, to be sure that you run everything together rather than just pulling out campaigns, like one campaign here, one campaign there, and just hope it works, basically.
Yeah, it's got to be a coordinated multi-channel strategy. Don't use a multi-channel strategy in an incoherent, disassociated way. That's going to be not only a waste of time, it's probably going to confuse your customer, your prospect.
Agree with this. Yeah. And ultimately, where can people find you? So if anybody wants to find out more about you, obviously we'll have the links in the description below, but tell us what you are focusing on at the moment, what you think it can be interesting for more people to find out about, and ultimately if somebody wants to work with you or to specifically pick your brains on something, how is best for them to reach out to you?
Yeah. So contact information, just bruce@eckfeldt.com. So just first name, last name is my email address. Eckfeldt.com is my website. It's interesting. I think the thing that has been most effective for me and most interesting for a lot of the folks I work with are these CEO roundtables, where I put like 6 to 8 CEOs together. I meet with them a couple times, really help them figure out the strategy. I will say this, most scaling challenges come back to the leader. right? It's who they are, how they work, things they get hung up on, assumptions they've made. And 90% of my work is just clearing up the headspace of a leader to help them get themselves figured out and straight and aligned and decided. And then it's so much easier to align the rest of the company and how they're going to grow. That is most of the work that I'm doing right now. And once we do that, we do all the strategic framework work in terms of figuring out how we're going to scale and get the company to a couple $100 million. And not that that's easy, but it's easier sometimes than the headspace issue.
Got you. And one last small question, but I'm curious. Yeah. So you are writing for Ink.com. What do you think are cool articles, or where are you looking at producing new content? In which direction for them, or with them, or with this type of publications?
Well, so when I write for Ink, I'm trying to find these little nuggets. Honestly, the way I create my Ink articles is through the conversations I'm having with leaders. Right. So I have a conversation with somebody and they bring up a question, a comment, something. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a good question. I would probably do it this way. Or here's an idea. I'm like, oh, all right, I'm going to write an article on that. And I'll actually send Ink articles to the people that inspired them and say, hey, you know what? I was thinking about our conversation, decided to write a piece, and they love it. That's what it's a great way. But it's a great source of content because I know that, hey, look, if one person's thinking about this, the chances are there's other people thinking about this.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So going into the strategy direction now with them, or digital, or just depending on what comes and what's exciting at a certain point?
Yeah, so I look at all facets of the business. We look at people, strategy, execution, cash. I look at core frameworks. I look at fundamentals, values, culture. Because in the end of the day, the constraints in a company are going to shift around. And for a time, it might be strategy, and then it might be cash, and then it might be your culture, and then it might be talent. And I need to be well-versed in all these different facets to figure out, advise a CEO on how they're going to grow and scale. And he or she needs to know lots of different things. That's the challenge of going from founder to CEO. As a CEO is a generalist that's coordinating activities against a strategic plan. And not a lot of people make that shift effectively into CEO mode out of founder mode.
Okay, nice. I'm gonna keep following you and you guys as well. Make sure you follow Bruce on the social platforms as well. You have all the links in the description below. And Bruce, until next time, this was an amazing chat. Thanks a lot for making the time. I know you are a very busy man.
Andrei, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
It was a big pleasure. Looking forward to speaking soon.